Speaking of belts, Boots Ennis, it appears, is going to keep his version of the 147-pound title. Matchroom announcing Boots versus Chukadzian Part 2. And I noticed that on the billing, they don't list it being a rematch. They don't say 2 on it because nobody wants to remember the first one, which was just over a year ago. And it was an awful, awful fight. It was Boots Chukadzian, but really it was Boots versus a jackrabbit in the ring. Chukadzian moving around, staying out of the way, and not getting knocked out. Well, the IBF, in their infinite wisdom, has ordered a rematch between these two guys. Bam Rodriguez is going to defend his belt on the undercard. Let me just say this about the belt situation, Lance. Like, this is a spotlight on the IBF because on one hand, you have a situation with William Skull and Vladimir Shishkin, which Skull should not be the mandatory. And I'm a Skull head, but Skull should not be the mandatory for a world title given the resume that he has. But I don't mind enforcing mandatories. I think it's necessary in boxing. You have to enforce mandatories. I also think the IBF separately made a great decision on the Josh Warrington, Anthony Kakachi fight. Like, Josh Warrington had lost 2 fights in a row, last one by knockout, was moving up in weight. Like, he had no business fighting for the IBF 130-pound title. This, though, is different. This is taking a guy who just over a year ago got wiped out. Like, what was it, 12-0, 11-1, whatever it was on those scorecards, completely wiped out in that fight. After 3 low-level wins, you are ordering him to face Boots Ennis for that 147-pound title. And if that fight goes similar to what it looked like a year ago, and there's really no reason to believe that it won't, then the IBF is going to look stupid. They are going to look really dumb for putting this guy in that position. You look up and down their rankings. They could have done a whole bunch of different things. They could have ordered this guy to fight, Alexis Rocha or somebody else that, was climbing the rankings over the last couple of years. They didn't. They let him fight 3 relatively low-level fights. One of them was a title eliminator, and all of a sudden, boom, a year plus since that fight, he is back in the mix. I think it's embarrassing, and I think the IBF is going to look really bad if Chukadzian gets in that fight and does the exact same thing all over again.
Absolutely. I mean, look, we talk to enough boxing managers to know this. The IBF, the way their rules are, there's ways that these managers know to game the system. And that's exactly what happened here. It's happened before in the past. And you're absolutely right. The IBF is like the only sanctioning body with the balls to be able to strip some of these guys who deserve to be stripped, or at least hold their feet to the fire and fight some of the right guys that they need to confront. But in this case, it is an absolute outrage. And it's like, where is the logic? Where is the common sense that has allowed this fight to proceed after 3 120, 108 scorecards were turned in not even 2 years ago? So it's crazy. I don't understand why it's happening. And I mean, the other element of this is that who on the Boots side, whether it's Eddie Hearn, whether it's Boots and Bozy, is saying like, hey, this is okay for us to do. You're right. I mean, the steps should have been taken to either say, screw that belt, we're out of here, or, find a better opponent. I know they tried with Brian Norman, but having done a lot of the reporting on this situation, they were way late to the party on this. I mean, they kind of allowed the situation to become the situation it has become, and it's going to happen on November 9th, unfortunately. A lot of procrastination and a lot of, I don't know, laziness or disinterest. I don't know what was going on, but they could have nipped this in the bud far sooner than what they did. And it's an unfortunate situation for the sport. The best thing about it is that card is that we get to see Bam Rodriguez back on it. So that'll be good because everyone loves a good Bam fight.
Yeah, Bam in a mandatory title defense, not fighting Gallo Estrada, which I think was the right decision by Gallo Estrada. Like, I don't know what happens to him at 118 pounds, but if he had gone back in with Bam Rodriguez, it would have been the same thing all over again from that fight earlier in the year. He would have gotten knocked out once again. I on the subject of keeping the title, I do like that decision. Like, this is a tough fight for Boots Ennis to swallow because he just wants to be in big fights. He's been in enough of these kind of fights. He just wants to be in big event type fights. And it's got to be brutal to look across the ring and see Karen Chukadzian once again. But that title is still a form of currency for him. Because, look, I know they kicked the tires on some fights at 154, Charles Conwell among them. But without an obvious path to a big title fight or just a big fight in general against like a Terrence Crawford, there's no reason to relinquish your title. And if you're Boots Ennis, look, it's tough to fight this guy again, but you're going to get paid like $1.2, $1.3 million, whatever the deal that would struck to pay him to take this fight for basically a sparring session. You're going to get to do it at home in Philadelphia. They did a great crowd for the Avanesian fight earlier this year. It's probably going to be another good crowd with Boots Ennis coming back. Like, you get paid good money for light work. It's not great money, but you can pay good money for light work. And then you can turn the page and look at 2025 and say, all right, now let's go revisit the Brian Norman fight a little bit early. Brian Norman going to fight Derek Cuevas. If he gets through that fight, well, let's start talking about a unification fight right now and make that happen in March or April of 2025. I think it's the right call to stay at 47 and take this fight. As bad as I think it could potentially be, it's the right call to take it, in my opinion. What do you think?
Well, look, me and you know Brian Norman, but not a lot of people know Brian Norman. It's still, I mean, yes, it is a unification fight, but we need to see a little bit more of Brian Norman for him to have more brand name recognition. He's not going to be able to get to the PBC guys, I don't think, unless he is done with Eddie Hearn, sooner rather than later, right?
Can we take this moment to note that Amantas Stanionis, who was very public on social media about the offer that Eddie presented to his people, it now appears like he's going to get stuck fighting Shakram Giasov. Now, that's a winnable fight, no question, for Stanionis, but it's not an easy fight by any stretch. And I don't know what a purse bid would yield for something like that. 250,000, 300,000. Like, I don't know what we're talking about for that kind of bid. So look, Mario Barrios lands on his feet. He winds up on the Jake Paul, Mike Tyson undercard. Probably good money in that. Stanionis, I don't know. I thought he might have overplayed his hand with that. If he gets stuck with Giasov with this purse bid that the IBF just ordered, that could be that's a tough consolation prize to settle for.
Yeah, all these guys, all of them are sort of like, on their own separate islands, just kind of like digging in their heels. And it's like you're taking these fights that are head scratching, given what champions should be doing. Yeah.
So look, hopefully we get some unification fights in 2025. I do think that a Norman fight is makeable. I don't think they were so far off with their negotiations that it can't be revisited in December and in January when there's more time between fights and there's not, hopefully another IBF mandatory out there waiting. And look, I know Norman's people, in the back of their minds, maybe not even the back, like Teofimo Lopez is on their minds. Ryan Garcia is on their minds. Like, they're thinking of some of these things. But I do think that a Boots fight can be made, which is a pretty big fight, again, in Philadelphia. I think you draw a good crowd there for those two guys. And a fun fight. Both those guys can crack. And I think it's a fun fight to watch, on the surface for two guys like that. All right.
And all those 154 guys still exist for Boots Ennis too, down the road,
I agree. They're all right there, potentially waiting for him next year. Like, we have to figure out what's going to happen with Bud first. Like, if Bud moves up to 168, Bud's not coming back to 154. Right. Like, he's done in that weight class. And then you can start talking about making a Boots fight against the Tim Tszyu, which would be a huge fight. Virgil Ortiz in that mix as well. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I think 2025 you could see. Look, from the way I understand it, is that Boots wants at least one unification fight. So if maybe it's not undisputed, but if he can become the unified champion at 147 and there's a bigger fight waiting for him at 54, I think that could be enough to satisfy Boots his reign at welterweight.